Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Eliamep's Mediterranean Program webinar on Ukraine war in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm very happy to have an esteemed panel with us today to discuss the potential of the region's energy, looking at it from many angles, depending on which lens we look at, whether it's Israel, the US, the EU, Greece, and Turkey. We have an hour and a half. I will ask each of my panelists to give 5 to 7 minutes of remarks based on certain questions that I have prepared, and then we'll open the floor to more questions from the audience. As we know, this war has been a wake-up call for Europe, the world. Our region is impacted, global markets are impacted, and we would like to see today how the Eastern Mediterranean, the region's least connected side of the Mediterranean, if we look at Central Mediterranean or Western Mediterranean, there is some connectivity, there are energy infrastructure and interconnectors facilitating the markets, except our part of the Mediterranean. Whether energy can be a catalyst of collaboration, whether energy on renewables can help the EU Green Deal reach its targets, and where we go from now. Every war is a challenge, not to human life, but also to the way we create security across our borders, our regions. So let me start to introduce our panel. Ambassador Harari from Israel and member of Meet Aviv, the think tank that looks at regional politics. Professor Kut from Turkey, who is yet to join us. Ms. Soku from the US, correspondent of Kathimerini and analyst with the Atlantic Council. Last but not least, Konstantin Levoyanis, our own analyst at Eliamep, that is a specialist on an energy policy, the EU and Greece. So let me start with you, Ambassador Harari. Israel is signing agreements with countries of the region, and its reserves are key to a regional market. What are the challenges and opportunities you see going forward following this moment of conflict? Is it an opportunity for more collaboration in our region?
Thank you very much, Cleopatra. It's a privilege to be here with you at this webinar. Good afternoon from Israel. Good morning, I suppose, from the States. Indeed, as you said, the war in the Ukraine is a wake-up call for all of us from different angles and levels. Actually, looking at the East Med, I think it's quite important, let's say, to remind all of us, let's say, that the last 10, 12 years, there were a lot of developments, quite ambitious and impressive developments, gas discoveries, but as well political, strategic implications as well. I will briefly emphasize 3 main points concerning the war, let's say concerning the looking ahead. And I think it's quite important, as I said, to remind that from the gas discoveries in the East Med for Israel and for the region, they produced very impressive and very positive, let's say, development. I think for Israel, of course, it produced energy security. More than 60% of the electricity in Israel is produced by natural gas. As you mentioned, Israel has signed 2 export agreements of natural gas to Egypt and Jordan, and there is an effort to increase the volume as much as possible. There are limits concerning the pipelines there, and this is quite important in my opinion from political strategic point of view. during these 10, 12 years, we were able to develop very close, very important relations with several countries in the region, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and more than that, let's say, to develop some kind of, I would say, regional architecture. Just look at the EMGF, the Regional Gas Forum. So I think that the EastMed is facing this present development after it has established, I would say, quite interesting and impressive cooperations. Looking ahead, well, I suppose, I mean, all of us know that opportunities and challenges are combined all together. And I will mention briefly three of them. I think that clearly the war in the Ukraine has shifted a lot of, let's say, attractiveness to gas, to energy in different parts of the world, but as well to the EastMed. The volumes, I would say, of exporting gas from the EastMed are quite limited from a timetable point of view. But just a week ago, actually, the Minister of Energy of Israel stated that a fourth licensing round will be starting very soon as a response to needs by Europe because of the war in the Ukraine. Clearly, the timetable is going to be a few years, but I think this is quite important message, at least, I mean, going ahead. The second point, which I think is very much important, and not by necessity, it is connected very much to the war in the Ukraine, is this process of rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. In the last few months, we all know that there are quite a lot of efforts to establish or to find out or to investigate what can be done in order to recover or to improve relations between Israel and Turkey. I think there are quite a lot of question marks concerning these relations. Clearly, there is a necessity to renew a trust between the two countries. Clearly, there is a need, I would say, to identify for both sides what are these days, 2022, their common interests. Okay, a lot has been changed in the region and beyond. As Israel stated very clearly in the last few months, this is not going to be on the expense of our very close and important relations with the rest of the partners in the region. Is it going to be possible? How it will go ahead? I think this is a huge challenge for both sides, and it seems to me that both sides understand the necessity to go ahead in a very, I would say, honest, open, deep, as much as possible way. The third point concerning the Lebanese angle, the Lebanese-Israeli angle, where we do still have this maritime border dispute. Just a few days ago, or in a few days' time, let's say, the FCPO will arrive to Karish gas field. Here, I believe that, and I think it's quite clear to all the relevant, let's say, players, that the dispute could be solved. I don't want to exaggerate by saying easily, but it's quite not so difficult. The problem, of course, is, as always, with the Lebanese decision-making process and how much a government or a new government or a new president is able to do it. But the point which I would like to emphasize here, that if Lebanon goes ahead with its own potential of discoveries, it is extremely important for the Lebanese economy. It is extremely important for the region as a whole, I would say. Just to sum up with one sentence, these few remarks, I believe that now, the main challenge basically for all of us is to think how much inclusivity is possible at these specific circumstances. And I think the timing of this question mark is very much important after the EastMed region has emerged as a region with a lot of potential and with proven, I would say, a strategic cooperation. This is quite an important, let's say, starting point to go ahead from these present circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me move on to Ms. Soku. you have written extensively on EastMed from a US lens. Can you give us your perspective on how the EastMed region is viewed from the US and how a regional market can add value to America's economic and foreign policy priorities? And how has Russia's war on Ukraine cast a spotlight on the region from a US lens? Thank you. I think you are muted.
Excuse me for this. Hello, good morning from Washington, D.C., and thank you for this invitation to ELIAMEP, and it's an honor to be here with the prestigious panelists. I would like to start by noting that EastMed as a region hasn't been traditionally a focus for U.S. foreign policy. There are other ways to looking at the region, MENA, the European, the Southeastern European region, but not comprehensively as a different region of looking into this part of the world. This has happened recently in the past 10 years. As Ambassador Harari mentioned, alluded to as well. And this has been the result of various developments that are happening both in US foreign policy, in the world per se, but also in Congress, in the US Congress. So there's been a strategic decision to look at the region as the Eastern Mediterranean and what it entails. This was very much related to the gas finds in the region, but it quickly went way beyond that to security cooperation, to defense even cooperation, to climate issues that the US thought could be better addressed if the countries of the region cooperated. So this is something that very much engages the trilateral partnerships as we call them, the Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, Cyprus, Egypt partnerships in cooperation and with the support of the US. This is something that has been very well supported in Congress. There has been the EastMed Act for energy and security cooperation that brought the region into the highlight. And increasingly, and I should mention, given that during this process, we had, of course, a change of government in the US. So the new Biden administration also followed this obvious this narrative about the region, but chose to focus on the green transition and how to enhance cooperation, but more so based on the transition to green energy. So this is something that is very much centered in the US policy considerations. At the same time, I would say that the war in Ukraine, obviously, has upended this understanding, has brought back to the forefront the need to use the EastMed as an alternative source of energy, frankly, for even Europe, which wasn't the case until a few months ago, because even the gas finds from the EastMed weren't directed to the European market. This has already started to change since early this year as a result of the crisis that we are seeing in the energy markets. So certainly there's been more emphasis on energy security as well as the green transition on the US side. This is something that is well understood. And of course, I should mention, and we can get back to that later, that in the discussion that while we're talking about cooperation in the region, there's always obviously the challenges of instability that derive from the problematic relations of Greece with Turkey, or I should mention the problematic relations that, and of course the Cyprus issue, that is making it hard for Turkey with its current stance to join the cooperation that has been taking place in the region. So with that, I'll stop and I'll come back.
Great, thank you. Lots of good points from you and from Ambassador Harari earlier. Let me turn to you, Konstantin. The EU Green Deal, to be successful in meeting its goals, will need Mediterranean resources, solar, gas, hydrogen from the East Med and North Africa. But connectivity, production, storage, and transport from these markets remains fragmented. Cyprus remains the only EU market without connectivity to the EU grid. So what are the key insights you can share from a Brussels perspective? And what are the important considerations for Greece and Cyprus?
Many thanks, Cleopatra. And good afternoon from Brussels. Thank you for setting this up. It's a pleasure to meet Ambassador Harari, albeit behind the screens. Katerina, nice to see you again. I'll start from a couple of things that I'd like to underline. Before we got to the EU Green Deal, the energy and climate mantra of this European Commission, we had what was called the Energy Union. And a part of that was ensuring that all member states in Europe were not reliant on one supplier of gas. And as a result of these policies, a lot of EU money was made available for gas projects, be it pipelines, LNG facilities. Why do I mention this? Because one of the most important projects supported by the EU was the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. Everyone in Greece is probably familiar with that. It's a project that received a lot of heavy pushback, both in Greece and at EU level, for numerous different reasons. And fast forward to today, and with everything that's happening, the fallout of the Ukraine invasion, the war, Greece and Southeastern Europe would be in a lot more trouble if this pipeline hadn't been built. And we talked in the past about how Greece can become an important transit hub for gas supplies to Europe. And now we're starting to see that in practice, Greece playing a pivotal role in Southeast Europe, supplying the Balkans, reducing supply shocks, getting more close with partners such as Israel, Egypt, the ambassador mentioned earlier. So I think the EU feels vindicated in terms of the support that it gave to Greece and these gas projects in the past. Now, moving on and coming closer to where we are today, the decisions to support gas infrastructure expansion were taken many years ago in what was a very different world. And the meaning of energy security was different, I would say. So in academia, we love talking about the energy trilemma. An energy security trilemma. That's normally pictured as a pyramid of diversification, sustainability, and competitiveness being the three elements that constitute energy security. And for many years, we thought of diversification as being the pinnacle of this pyramid. But today, sustainability is clearly at the top. And we've had gas crisis after gas crisis. The pattern is continuing. 2009, the Bulgarian government falls because of high energy prices because of the cutoffs from Russia. 2014, Russia invades Crimea. Now, 2022, we've got a full-blown war going on. What I want to say is that fossil fuel prices are volatile. They always have been, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that brings us to Repower EU, which was the plan that was presented on the 18th of March by the European Union. It's the plan of the Union to wean the continent away completely from Russian fossil fuels by the end of the decade. And before I get to some of the key proposals, I want to mention the following. There is still a gas element in this strategy. I believe it's flawed. Now, the Commission is pushing for the EU to be able to make joint purchasing agreements for LNG cargoes. Much like we did for COVID-19 vaccines, we made joint purchasing agreements among the member states. Now they want to do the same with gas. And there's a lot of emphasis on using global LNG to meet our energy needs. That's LNG, liquefied natural gas. There's a lot of it because of the shale gas and oil revolution in the US. The US is looking to become one of the biggest suppliers of natural gas in the world, surpassing former traditional producers. You've got Qatar as well, major producer. But the thing is, LNG markets are dictated by Asian demand. The prices there will always be higher, and shippers will always go where the price tells them. It's a fantasy to think that as Europeans, we will be able to go to our Asian friends or to traders and urge them to give us a better price simply because we're European. That's why the way forward is clear. We need more renewables. We need more wind and solar projects in our region. We need to look more seriously at hydrogen. And on the renewable side, one of the proposals coming out of the EU is a solar strategy that has a target of installing over 320 gigawatts of newly installed photovoltaics by 2025. To give you an idea, that's over twice today's level. And the target for 2030 is 600 gigawatts. Now, there are even obligations being proposed that all new buildings public buildings must have solar panels on them. In our region, we need to see how we can get a proper framework of incentives for consumers as well. This is a big problem because for years we've been trying to make consumers of energy into producers of energy as well. This is very common. We see it in a lot of Western European countries that there are so-called prosumers. So you've got consumers that produce their own energy with solar PV, but we have issues with incumbents, particularly in our region, that don't like the idea of consumers becoming producers of energy. But I think we need to catch up with the rest of the Europe and find a framework that works for both sides. That's severely lacking. Another big problem is permitting. Very painful issue. It takes up to 8 to 9 years to get a permit for an offshore wind project in Greece. And the Renewable Energy Directive says it should take no longer than 2 years. That's the law. We also need a one-stop shop. Again, that's the European law. But we find ourselves having multiple different ministries having a say on permitting. We need one. We need to align with what the law tells us. Otherwise, we'll just keep paying fines. So another interesting development is that the EU has made proposals to amend the Renewable Energy Directive and enshrine in the law that renewable projects are in the overriding public interests. And member states are also mandated to define go-to areas for renewables, for wind and solar. And once the member state has defined those go-to areas, the permits for those go-to areas will need to be approved within 1 year. So these are proposals that are currently in discussion. And this is critical for EastMed, where we not only need to get production projects off the ground, but we need to invest heavily in infrastructure. That all takes time. And last but not least, I want to speak a little bit about hydrogen. The EU has set another objective here of producing 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen by the end of this decade. To give you an idea, that can contribute to reducing the EU's dependence on natural gas from Russia by approximately 27 billion cubic meters. That's nearly a third. Reducing oil dependence by almost 3.9 million tons. Very ambitious, but we have to be ambitious here. There's huge opportunity to decarbonize heavy industries, transport sector. I'll give you a very good example today. It costs, how much does it cost to fill your car? We see that in many European countries, if not all, it's above 2 euros per litre. I think in Greece, it's almost 2.4 unleaded. So that's €2 per litre. And in Germany, you can use hydrogen today to fill your car up for €5 per kilo. And you need around 5 kilos of hydrogen to fill your car. That's €25 to fill your car with hydrogen, with a charging time of 5 minutes. So, you know, these price assumptions are also with fossil-based hydrogen. We want to replace fossil hydrogen with green, renewable hydrogen. And there are many places in Europe where green hydrogen is already cheaper than fossil hydrogen, particularly in countries where we have good solar and wind resources. And guess what? We have that in the East Med. So what else do we have? We have massive shipping industry. We have tourist sector that's dependent on these ships. We have coal regions that need to be delignified. And there's a massive opportunity here through hydrogen for new labor, skilled jobs, clean water production from investments needed in desalination plants. You need water to produce renewable hydrogen. We have pieces of rock, uninhabited islands in our region where we could build wind turbines linked to water electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. So if we manage to connect our islands, we can electrify them with renewable electricity. We can produce hydrogen to decarbonize our industries, our maritime sector. It's win-win. And I'm getting to the end now. To the tourist sector, I know there are concerns. There's NIMBYism, not in my backyard syndrome, very much prevailing in our region. I say this: if we set distance-based measures for wind projects, if we set them at a specific limit away from the shores, we should have no issues. And lastly, Cleopatra, I know you like this. The EU has specifically proposed the setting up of what is called a European Global Hydrogen Facility. As part of this plan, the EU wants to develop a more structured international outreach and cooperation with third countries on hydrogen. And there are already a lot of interesting things happening in Egypt, in particular, in Israel related to hydrogen. Egypt has a big project they are developing now. It could feed into a potential East Med hydrogen pipeline, or it could be converted to ammonia or hydrogen and shipped wherever it's needed. So lots of interesting things happening out of here. Sorry if I spent too much time.
No, lots of interesting things. New definitely will take a shift both of mindset and of investment and policy making in our region to meet the goals you've just described, Konstantin. Professor Kut, welcome to ELIAMEP and to the Mediterranean Program, our webinar today. It's a pleasure to see you. Earlier, Ambassador Harari made a specific point about the rejuvenation of Israeli-Turkey relations. I have a question for you. Given that Turkey is a significant regional actor, at least for our region for sure, how do you see Turkey balancing its regional priority given its role in NATO, its relationship with the EU, and collaboration with Russia? I mean, our webinar is focusing a lot on energy and the connectivity of our region to serve the independence of energy production and transport, both regionally but also to the EU and to the international markets. How do you see Turkey's role in this effort?
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm also very sorry to be late. I had this connection problem. I live on an island, so, you know, things happen. Now, let me give you a brief summary of how things are seen from the perspective of Ankara, first of all. What is the current situation as interpreted by the decision makers and policymakers in Turkey? The Russian aggression against Ukraine basically gave Turkey 4 areas of major concern. The first one has to do with hard security. The sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of regional states are challenged and undermined by a regional power, which is also a global power. I'll come to that in a moment. We have, of course, the issues related to Georgia, Crimea, Donbass, then the whole of Ukraine, and also other frozen conflicts in the former Soviet area. This is a very serious security issue for Turkey. Just let me give you one small statistic. With Russian involvement in military involvement in the crisis of in Georgia, 2008, and then Crimea in 2014, Russian control over the maritime zones of the Black Sea has increased 350%. This has changed pretty much the whole balance of power in the Black Sea. As again, thinking in terms of hard power, Turkey, for the first time in the last 350 years, had lost a land a border with Russia. In the last 250 years, 300 years, Ottomans and Russia had no less than 11 wars. That's basically a war for every generation. So the fact that the relative comfort that Turkey experienced after the end of the Cold War, by basically losing this land border to be defended against Russia, is upended now when Russia use force, military force, to change border, acquire territory, and deny independence and sovereignty of parts and whole of neighboring states, with whom Turkey also have special relationship. So this is the hard security shock that Turkey has gone through. And of course, this has implications on Turkey's NATO connection. But we can come to that later. The second issue was the second concern was the concern about food security. Now, Russia and Ukraine being major food exporters, food providers, the fact that the war practically prevented Ukraine and somehow limited Russian export of mainly wheat, but also cooking oil, sunflower oil, as well as a very important agricultural input, chemical fertilizers. This whole concept of food security has been called into question, especially for those states who were dependent on imported foodstuff. And of course, number one is wheat. Now, Turkey is a food surplus country. Turkey is a major producer of wheat. Depending on the year, Turkey is generally within the first 10 wheat growers in the world. But then Turkey is also a major wheat importer, because Turkey has a huge agricultural industry sector. Turkey is the number one provider of world's flour and pasta. Together with the European Union, Turkey and the European Union together provides 50% of world's pasta. Let me give you this. But that means that also Turkey needs a constant supply And the major suppliers have always been Russia and Ukraine. Or the other way around, of course, Ukraine and Russia. So this, therefore, is a very major issue for Turkey from the perspective of food imports, economic value, and given the situation in Turkey's economy currently, anything that disrupts any economic activity will be multiplied in its effects. The third issue is the energy security, of course. Turkey is an energy-dependent country, and 75% of Turkey's energy use is imported. Natural gas, 98% of Turkey's natural gas need is imported. Turkey is import dependent on natural gas by 98%. 33% of this comes from Russia. That used to be 65%, now down to 33%, and this is very important, and I'll come to that later if I have time. That also represents 11% of total Russian gas exports. So Turkey is a very important buyer of Russian natural gas and also pays in cash. That's also an important element in our analysis. 27% of the Turkish natural gas import is from Azerbaijan and another 21% from Iran. Turkey has 6 gas pipelines crossing its territory. From 2 of them, 22 billion cubic meters of gas is supplied to the EU. So Turkey is not only a major gas market for its own consumption, but also it's a transit market as a not a small amount of natural gas, mostly from Azerbaijan, but also from Russia, also goes through Turkey's territory. Oil, Turkey is 93% import dependent on oil, and 25% of this comes from Russia. Coal, finally, 34% import dependence, and 30% of that comes from Russia. So you can see how Turkey's economic activity is dependent on energy. Turkey's energy needs is dependent on imports, and in its imports, Russia plays a huge role. Let me interject a small anecdote, a tragic anecdote. When in 2015, the Russian fighter jet was downed by the Turkish Air Force in the Syrian border, Russia immediately imposed a drastic embargo on anything coming from Turkey. And the only exception was gas and oil. So everything stopped pretty much, including like 4 million tourists who stopped from coming within a month, to tomatoes. But then when Putin is asked whether they will stop sending gas and oil to Turkey, they said, no, this is a totally different matter. Right? So this gives you an idea about Turkey's dependence on Russia, but also Russian dependence on Turkey on energy matter. Now, finally, the fourth area, the economic impact of regional instabilities. Again, the view from Ankara is that Turkey is situated at the intersection of several crisis-prone regions, each with multiple regional powers, one of which is also a global power. So when Turkish decision makers look at Russia, they see one, a regional power, but also a global power, which plays two different roles, which complicates the foreign policy calculations of Turkey. In other words, if I have to be more clear, some of the acts of Russia, foreign policy acts of Russia against Turkey, does not have as objective Turkey itself, but, for example, Turkey's allies, the United States, right? But Turkey has to deal with the consequences. This situation results in various vulnerabilities and insecurities for Turkey. Turkey's dependence on regional stability and regional resources compel Turkey to follow a foreign policy strategy of developing interdependencies to balance these vulnerabilities and insecurities. There are lots of regional rivalries, of course, and also domestic political choices and constraints result in unexpected effects on foreign policy, usually as a result of individual decisions of the President of the Republic of Turkey. And the general distrust and lack of credibility in the region makes this mostly, I would say, benevolent approach of Turkey to regional stability more and more difficult to achieve. Now, one of the major elements of regional stability, because we are sitting in a region where 60% of world energy is exported. So this whole energy package is very important. And Turkey has a specific energy strategy, which very briefly has to do with diversification of routes and resources in its supply, in the supply of oil and gas, to contribute to regional and global energy security, to be a regional trade center in energy, a hub, to put in line its energy strategy with environmental concerns, to increase its share of domestic and renewable energy, especially in electricity production, and also to include nuclear power in its energy mix. Now, these priorities of Turkey in the energy area are totally in line with International Energy, OECD's International Energy Agency's 10-point plan to reduce the European Union's reliance on Russian natural gas. This was a document that was published in 3rd of March 2022, where its main, the summary is that the International Energy Agency basically suggests that no new gas supply contracts is made with Russia. That's exactly what Turkey is trying to do. Replace Russian supplies with gas from alternative sources. That's exactly what Turkey is trying to do. Introduce gas storage obligations to enhance market resilience. This is exactly what Turkey is trying to do. Turkey has increased its regasification capacity to the amount or to a level that would be accountable for 50% of its natural gas imports. That means that Turkey has the ability to import, store, and regasify 50% of its yearly natural gas.
Professor, have to stop you here so we can go for another round. If you could conclude,
I came to my last sentence, and that is, this is where EastMed comes in.
Great.
So maybe in the second round, we'll have more chance to talk about it.
Great. Yes, thank you. That's a good point to set the ball rolling back to Ambassador Harari. Ambassador, earlier you made that point about Turkey, of course, but given what Konstantin has described as the EU ambition, given what Ms. Soku has explained as US goals for security in the region, and given the ambitions that Professor Kut has outlined for Turkey, where do you see the let's say the lightning rod or the moment of starting to make connectivity in the region happen? We spoke about interdependencies, that our region is the least connected region. We still need to see that propelling change, renewables, infrastructure, supply, demand. So where do you see the big step coming in? Where's the big moment?
Sure. Thank you very much. Just a few points, of course. Konstantin mentioned and emphasized very much, of course, the importance of the goals of renewable. And I think that, and since we emphasize very much, as we should, basically, connectivity and cooperation, I think that we should aim in a much more ambitious way, with all respect to natural gas, let's do it this way, to enhance cooperation on renewables. Basically, this is a soft area which does not need by necessity to bridge, let's say, political difficulties, political sensitivities. By the way, I suggest for the sake of this discussion, let's say, to put aside the word of hub. Hub means one or two, let's say, centers of whatever. Since we are aiming, let's say, for, again, cooperation and connectivity, we should be able to cooperate in different fields. But anyhow, my first point is concerning renewable. I think it's extremely important to find ways to go ahead with this cooperation with all the relevant players, and it can be done, let's say, even before solving, let's say, political disagreements, etc., etc. Second point, I think, as Katerina mentioned, Washington did not look toward the EastMed in a very, let's say, serious way or combined way until recently. And I think it has changed, of course, and I think this is an asset, basically. It's an asset that the region should take advantage of it in order to go ahead with this cooperation efforts. And my third point is concerning this, let's say, challenge of how to combine, how to cooperate with Turkey. I believe that the fact that these efforts of rapprochement or efforts to find a way or ways to cooperate or to bring Turkey in the region, since it takes place in a present circumstances where the region, as I said, has developed substantial, very impressive regional cooperation, I think this is a healthy starting point. It's a healthier starting point for the player, all the players, including Turkey. Now, clearly, there is a gap. There's a problem, let's say, of trust. I don't want to go to let's say, to analyze very much of whom to blame, of who is responsible for it. But my point is that the region was able to develop itself or to take advantage, let's say, of the opportunities that were laid upon it 10, 12 years ago, surprisingly and impressively. And Turkey nowadays, from different reasons, let's say, that Professor Kut knows much better than me, decided, I would say, just lately, to make an effort to join these processes. This is a healthy circumstances. And my point that it can be, or we should take advantage of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Katerina, back to you.
Oh, I think we lost Cleopatra. But I can maybe, whilst he's getting reconnected, maybe say a few points on what we've heard so far. I have to say that in a report we published last month at the Atlantic Council on US and Greece energy cooperation, we basically saw the cooperation in a regional context. It's not just to benefit Greece, obviously, and the reasons why Greece would be important for the US would be in the context of Southeast Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean on the energy security and the energy transition questions. So on these two fronts, and it's interesting, and I think I should mention it because it goes back to what Ambassador Harari was saying about how to build that trust, right, to engage with Turkey. So what we chose to do was basically say that until Greece and Turkey agree to address their maritime disputes that are frankly in the way of further cooperation in the region, we provided ideas that could basically enhance energy security and regional integration by leveraging bilateral ties and trilateral ties in the region. But I should mention that I do really think that unless these maritime issues are addressed, and of course the Cyprus issue, it will be hard to engage with Turkey on the further energy cooperation in the region. Now, in our proposals, we do advise to incentivize regional cooperations, turning the 3+1 mechanism with Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and the US into something bigger to include renewables and further more countries perhaps, but certainly engage the US more as well. Or leverage the Greek transition targets and its position as a top producer of renewable energy to increase green energy production in the region, support, importantly, electricity interconnectors between Europe, Asia, and Africa to transmit an increasingly green share of electricity from Israel, Egypt, and beyond, and opening the European market to renewable energy from a region that is particularly impacted by climate change. This is another concern, and the impact of climate change in the region and the geopolitical implications of that will need to be addressed by the transatlantic community. Better start early. Now, we also, and here I just need to add a little bit to what Konstantin said earlier. The crisis in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, the existential need that Europe has identified of diversifying from Russian gas, I think creates two impetuses. One is to double down on renewables, but the other one is to face the immediate need of substituting Russian gas with something else. And that's where LNG comes into play, gas comes into play. There needs to be, we argue, a review of all options to bring gas to Europe, including Eastern Mediterranean gas, under the light of the ongoing geopolitical and energy crisis. It's already happening via LNG, and both to Turkey and to Greece, by the way, from Egypt, from Alexandria. And potentially, we argue, we should just re-examine the East Med gas pipeline or its possible improvements in the medium term. So nothing should be off the table. That's our main argument here, given the necessity of the moment. And of course, I should mention that the focus should be on regional integration. As we mentioned earlier, that the region is one of the less interconnected in the Mediterranean, and we do need to conclude the projects that contribute to energy diversification, to more energy security, to the integration of the network, the energy network in Southeast Europe, a region where gas markets are less interconnected and more reliant, of course, on Russia. And I will stop here, hoping that we have Ms. Kitty back.
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry about that. When you said our proposals, can you clarify this is the Atlantic Council paper you have written,
yes.
Katerina? Yes, correct. Which was a great paper, and I would encourage everybody who's interested in the region to look at Ms. Soku's work on the Atlantic Council, Eastern Mediterranean. Konstantin, back to you. I see there's a question for you. Mariana, could you help us read out the question, because I cannot from where I am?
I can see it.
Oh, you can see it? So could you read it out, please, Konstantin? And,
So the question is, please explain to us existing regional projects of cooperation in the East Med regarding renewable energy, and to which extent do the territorial differences hinder these projects? So I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but in reality, a lot of the talks in the region have just been dominated around natural gas. So natural gas projects, be it East Med pipeline, be it LNG in Cyprus, or this new floating liquefied natural gas facility in Alexandroupoli in the north of Greece. As far as I'm aware, there have been talks of a Eurasia interconnector, so that would be electricity cables connecting Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. That's been on the table for almost as many years as I've been in the energy sector, but I don't think it's there yet. There have been some developments in Greece, notably in the last couple of days, the last month. Some decisions have been made in terms of putting a timeline for when we need to connect the islands. There have been talks about connecting Crete to the Peloponnese as well. So things are moving forward domestically in Greece, but in terms of interconnectivity between countries, I think we're still quite far behind. And I also want to touch on something that Ambassador Harari mentioned earlier about these competing notions of energy hubs, and Greece is an energy hub, Israel is a hub, Turkey's a hub. We're all hubs. We all want to be hubs. At the end of the day, I think what we're striving for is an interconnected model, much like we have in Scandinavia, in Northwestern Europe. When Denmark, for example, doesn't have enough wind, they have their connection with Norway, and they source electricity from Norway's hydro, and vice versa. When Norway doesn't have enough water or enough snow, they get their electricity from Denmark. So whether it's gas or electricity, that's what we want to create. We want to create interdependencies, or rather interconnections between us, so that we can help each other. That's what we need to be moving towards.
That's a good point. And my question to all of the panel as we go into our final round, I think, and I'll address this to Professor Kut. I know it's a difficult question. It's a chicken and egg moment where we let history defines our future. But the future is, or our present to define our future, calls for a completely different paradigm. The climate change, we have conflicts, we have migration, we have completely different challenges in addressing our present and looking at the future. And our future calls for more interconnectivity, collaboration. I'll ask the same question as I've asked to Ambassador Harari. Where do you see the moment of change where collaboration begins to happen, where we look more forward rather than back?
Right, thank you. I'll try to answer that. But first, let me clarify this whole hub thing. When we talk about energy hub in Turkey, I think now I realize that we have a totally different conception of a hub. Turkey as a hub means that Turkey as an intermediary between problematic producer countries and consumers. Turkey being a major consumer, its interests lie with other consumers. So Turkey being a hub means that other consumers will not solely depend on the producers, but also an intermediary who also is a major consumer. That creates a sort of an interdependence. Don't only think in terms of Eastern Med or Russia. I'm talking about Iran, of course. I'm talking about Azerbaijan. I'm talking about gas and oil of Caspian, which would include Turkmenistan, which would include Kazakhstan. So, you know, these are producers that want to send their oil and gas through someone that is not a rival producer. And if you look at the map, Turkey is there. So an energy-dependent Turkey being a conveyor of energy to others who need it is interdependence. So that's what Turks, at least, the Turkish decision makers, when they talk about Turkey being a hub, that's what they mean. Now, as to the chicken and egg, the vicious cycle. Yes, we have a serious vicious cycle. And in fact, in this region, we know how to manage vicious cycles, usually by not acting upon it. So we freeze. We try to freeze our bilateral problems. We have so many of them. But then everybody have bilateral problems. Bilateral problems should not stand in the way of requirements of multilateral cooperation at that scale. I mean, if you talk about border problems between two countries, you know, maritime zones, etc., etc., the United States and Canada have maritime zone disputes and border disputes, but they live with it. Because when finding a solution to the dispute would mean something impossible for any government to sell to the domestic audience, there will not be a solution. So it's better to forget about the problem, because the problem itself, the existence of problem itself, is not the problem. So we can actually live knowing that this line on a map passes from there instead of the other place, etc., etc. Why am I saying all this? We know that we need trust and confidence to build a healthy, interdependent, multi-layered cooperation area. For that, we need confidence building. For example, confidence building is extremely necessary for EastMed energy cooperation. But then confidence can be built through EastMed energy cooperation. It's up to us to choose where we start. Otherwise, it's a vicious cycle. How to break this vicious cycle? You need two things. One is political will, which I don't see much around. Two, an external factor that can break the cycle, a deus ex machina, if you want. Now, that may exist now in the form of the ugly aggression of Russia against Ukraine. This can be considered as a probable external impact that could break this cycle. But then, without political will, it is not going to happen. That would be my answer. I agree that, realistically speaking, without finding, if we link any possible cooperation between all the involved parties to the solution of all the bilateral problems, it's not going to happen. When it's not going to happen, in terms of energy, what we will see is that people, all involved parties will be investing in more expensive technologies. It will cost us more, but then it's going to happen. And what I realistically see in the near future to happen is that there will be more and more investment on regasification and terminals, storage capacity for LNG. I think under the current circumstances, investment in LNG is the future.
Great, thank you, everybody. I think as concluding remarks, if there are no more questions from the audience, I wanted to give our webinar sort of and our listeners a sort of a direction. I think Professor Kut concluded, or his last remarks were about investments in regasification and terminals for LNG. But the point is connecting the region to make sure that there is a potential in making, investment scalability matter, both for the euros and the dollars committed to these investments on energy in the region, but also the future of renewable energy in our region. Because the future is regional, the future is renewable. How do you comment on that, Ambassador Harari? And then we will go around for concluding remarks by everybody.
Well, I fully agree with the future is regional and the future is renewable, absolutely. And as I said before, I don't want to repeat myself. Basically, I think that cooperating with renewable, this is the very much, let's say, needed, and it's looking to the future. And basically, we can, through that, in a way, bypass, let's say, political differences. I just wanted to make the comment that I hope I didn't want to cause any kind of sensitivities by, let's say, advising to put the hub aside, but I think that it's much more important, let's say, to focus or to emphasize this connectivity. I look to the regional cooperation that was established in the East Med in the last 10, 12 years as a very encouraging development. Nowadays, 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, we look at it as something, very typical, very natural, very, wow, it used to be for the last, no, just 10 years ago. And I was an ambassador to Cyprus 2010, 2015, the beginning of this process, or just about the beginning of this process. And I can share with you, I'm sure that all of you know, it was new for all the relevant players. It wasn't so much, as we see it nowadays. And this regional cooperation was initiated by the region. It was not there was no any linkage, let's say, to any conflict. Barcelona process was linked to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Okay, clearly, to be very much honest with all of you, Turkey out of this process enabled, let's say, all the rest. To go ahead quite in a speedy way to cooperate. And as I said before, since this regional exercise quite succeeded, I think at this point of view, at this point of time, it is really healthy, and I believe it is possible to look at it from inclusivity point of view. And okay, clearly LNG and energy is a key issue. Clearly, when we look to the war in the Ukraine, but we cannot bypass, I suppose, this political dispute quite easily. So what I say is that let's try to push ahead cooperation on a lighter and still very much important fields of cooperation. B, let's enhance political dialogue as open, as honest as possible. And I suppose by that, we may be hoping to achieve a little bit more progress. It's regional, as you said, Cleopatra. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Katerina?
Thank you, Cleopatra. I will be brief. I think that I saw one of your own proposals a while back about a Mediterranean Green Deal. And I think that this could be the catalyst for change. Of course, it won't come on its own. I think the energy crisis right now, but also the climate crisis will be our deus ex machina. This will be the factor that will necessitate us to look at the region in a different and our cooperation in a different way. I think that, of course, how you take it and what you do with it is a matter of its country and its government to decide whether it will address it by looking inwards or by looking outwards and to its neighbors for cooperation. I think I would close with, I saw yesterday there's a new Foreign Affairs article by Bordow and O'Sullivan that says that we're talking about a new energy order originating in Europe, but radiating to the farthest reaches of the global economy. Energy security will be at the fore. Climate change will, of course, be a top concern too. So countries will increasingly, they say, look inward, prioritizing domestic energy production and regional cooperation. And they warn that countries should not retreat into strategic energy blocks, but keep the interconnectedness that has been for the past many decades, the name of the game on energy globally. So I think this is the challenge that we need to face. We need to be able to talk to each other in the region. This is, for me, a key point to start from, and not add to our problems, but solve the existing ones, right? So that's my take.
Excellent, thank you. Before I give the floor to Konstantin to help me conclude also, I'll give the floor to you, Professor Kut, for your concluding thoughts. You're muted.
I realized, thank you. This interconnectivity is very important, and it has to happen. I remember Turkey has developed various ideas when it comes to its Middle Eastern partners. I remember in 1990s all these discussions that we had with Israeli academics and policymakers on how to enhance water supply of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and so on. There were several pipeline projects that went up and down and disappeared eventually. And, of course, Turkey had developed several electrical grid interconnectivity, again, with its neighbors. So, yes, when it works, but we need an effort to make it work. The most important impediment to these efforts is to, again, I would say, I'm sorry for insisting on it, for domestic policy reasons, and this is true for Turkey as well. So I'm criticizing Turkey, I have been criticizing the Turkish decision makers for a long time for this, to put all foreign policy decisions of the country through the lens of domestic politics. That is a serious impediment to cooperation, because sometimes, many times, cooperation means concessions. And if a government cannot afford to be put in a position to selling the country, that's domestic politics, and it will prevent any further development of international cooperation. This is something that we should address and move beyond. Then it will be possible to develop sectoral interconnectivities.
Great, thank you. That's very encouraging remarks and perspectives. Konstantin, would you help me conclude on our conversation today, giving the regional view, the EU view, the multilateral organizations view on the impact on the region and the energy side of things?
I want to try and bring together some of the elements brought in by the other speakers, but before I do that, some facts. So post-Ukraine, we've all seen price crunch. Everyone's pocket is affected by the surge in energy prices. Factually speaking, what does that mean? Electricity prices have gone up on average by 5 times. Gas prices have gone up 8 to 10 times. So that's something to think about when we're developing policies. And I heard a statement from Ms. Sokol, from from Professor Kutz about LNG. On the one hand, LNG is short-term solution, more or less what Katerina said, because it solves the problem now. You need time to build the renewable projects, the new interconnections, and LNG can provide a solution now. Professor Kut, I think, put it, LNG is the future. I don't think it's the future. I think that it's a good short-term measure.
Near future.
Yeah. Near future, voila. So I think it can help us in the short term, but we mustn't lock ourselves into that. We have this tendency in our region to talk about natural gas far too much. Where has it got us the last 10, 15 years? It's great that we've developed that in those relationships. East Med Gas Forum was mentioned, and this is kind of a culmination of all those discussions, trying to bring all those players together to develop infrastructure, to develop a market or a regional market at best, because we're not talking about large quantities. Let's have it right. Where the East Med pipeline itself, we were talking about transiting about 10 billion cubic meters a year, which by comparison to what we're receiving from Russia is, very small amounts if we want to meet European demand. So those gas discoveries that we have discovered, and if there are any more in a 4th licensing round offshore Israel or offshore Cyprus or Greece for that matter, I think we're looking at that commodity as something that we can trade to Asia, as I mentioned before, but also as something that we can potentially use in our own countries, because we have all invested money in LNG. But again, I have to emphasize that we mustn't get bogged down in this gas narrative, and we really need, I would even go as far as saying something like an East Med Renewable Forum. If we have an East Med Gas Forum, then why don't we have one for renewables? But again, ideally, it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be, we need East Med Energy Forum. Simple as that. You need to develop an energy system in the region which is not interconnected today. So let's try and bring all those pieces together is what I'm trying to say. Let's not just focus on one thing. There is no silver bullet. And one last thing that I found really interesting in this discussion is about the notion of energy independence and energy interdependence. It's interesting what Katerina mentioned from that report. I think that Europe has understood that the continent needs to become energy independent and that it's going to achieve that through renewables. We faced, I mentioned the different gas crises, the volatility of fossil fuels isn't going away. And I think from a continent perspective, as a union, the push is clearly towards renewables on that end. And I'll conclude there and also say thanks to everyone. It's a pleasure to have been here.
Well, thank you. I think the issue that we need to look at, both on behalf of the LIAMEP and the Mediterranean program, but also our collaborators and discussants like yourself, it is the issue of governance. This is about governing our region in a way that opens up opportunities, not that closes the potential, in a way that addresses climate change, not that it creates problems. So it's a governance, whether it's a political, economic, or investment-related governance. We need leadership, both from the business community, the political, and the policy community. The civil society is there to support, but I think we need leadership that opens up opportunities, that thinks regionally, and governs our resources for the benefit of all Mediterranean people in our Eastern Mediterranean region, because we need a future. We cannot keep looking back. We need to look forward. With that, I want to thank everybody, thank our audience, and thank you, our panelists, for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.